in this video we'll be learning about patterns of social inequality and exclusion, which is part of our GS1 series. So now onwards, before we begin our chapter, we'll be looking into the main questions. Okay, so first question is, how is social inequality different from the inequality of individuals? What are some of the features of social stratification? How could you distinguish prejudice from other kinds of opinion or belief? What is social exclusion? What is the relationship between caste and economic inequality today? What is untouchability? Describe some of the policies designed to address caste inequality. How are the other backward castes different from the Dalits? What are the major issues of concern to Adivasis today? What are the major issues taken up by the women's movement over its history? In what sense can one say that disability is as much as social as a physical thing? So, for most of us who live in India, okay, inequality and exclusion are facts of life. We see beggars in the streets and on the railway platforms. Okay, that's a day on a day-to-day basis. We see all this kind of separation. Okay, there are cleaners, helpers on street side restaurants and tea shops. We are not surprised at the sight of the small children who work as domestic workers in middle class urban homes, carrying the school bags of older children to school. Okay, likewise, news reports about violence against women and prejudice against minority groups and differently abled are part of our everyday life. We see all these kind of news and on a day-to-day basis. Okay, and on closer examinations, it will show how few work harder than those who are located on the harder than those who are located on the lower ranks of society. As the South American proverb says, if hard labor were really such a good thing, the rich would keep it all for themselves. All over the world, back breaking work like stone breaking, digging, carrying heavy weights, pulling rickshaws or carts is invariably done by the poor. And yet, even though they are doing all this kind of hard labor, they rarely improve their life chances. You cannot see all these kind of people coming to the mainstream or these people becoming rich. Okay, so what is social about social inequality and exclusion? This is one of the questions. Okay, first one we need to see. First is social inequality and exclusion are social because they are not about individuals but about groups. Second point is they are social in the sense that they are not economic, although they are usually a strong. They have a strong link between social and economic inequality. Okay. Third, there are systematic structured. They are systematic and structured. They are a definite pattern of social inequalities. These three broad senses of social will be explored briefly now. Okay. So first one is what social inequality. So, in every society, some people have greater share of valued resources, money, property, education, wealth, health, power than others. Okay, so social resources can be divided into three forms. One is economic capital in the form of material assets and income. Okay, now the second point is cultural capital, such as educational qualifications and status. Then last one is social capital in the form of networks of contacts and social associations. So, for an example of all this kind of is a person from a well-off family, that is economic capital, can afford expensive higher education. He can go abroad and study. Okay, and so can acquire cultural and educational capital. Okay, someone with influential relatives and friends, that is social capital, may through access to good advice, recommendations, and information, manage to get a well paid job. So, patterns of unequal access to social resources are commonly called social inequality. So, now that is social inequality. Now, however, now we are going to look into the term social stratification. Okay, sociologists use the term social stratification to refer to a system by which categories of people in a society are ranked in a hierarchy, more like a caste system. Okay, This hierarchy then shapes people's identity and experiences, their relationship with the others, as well as their access to resources and opportunities. So, there was a question about social stratification. So, these three key principles that we are going to discuss now are to be kept in mind while writing answer for that question. So, social stratification is a characteristic of society, not simply a function of individual differences. Social stratification is a society wide system that unequally distributes social resources among categories of people. Okay, in the most technologically primitive societies, hunting and gathering societies, for instance, little was produced. So only redeemably social stratification could exist. See, when there are huge number of resources, it can be distributed on a different levels of people. But in the case of primitive technology, the social divide was small. Suppose we can say if a person was stronger at that time, he could gain more resources. Okay, so he was an apex level person. Okay, in more technologically advanced societies where people produce a surplus over and above their basic needs, however, social resources are unequally distributed in various social categories regardless of people's innate individual abilities. Now, second point is social stratification persists over generations. Okay, it is closely linked to the family and to the inheritance of social resources from one generation to the next. A person's social position is ascribed. That is, children assume the social positions of their parents. We can say hierarchy. Within the caste system, birth dictates occupational opportunities. In the previous chapter, we have seen occupation. Based on occupation, there was a social divide. A Dalit is likely to be confined in traditional occupations such as agricultural labor, scavenging, and leather work, with little chance of being able to get high paying white collar or professional work. The ascribed aspect of social inequality is reinforced by the practice of endogamy. That is, within the caste only there is marriage. Okay, the marriage happens only within the caste. Okay, that is, marriage is usually restricted to the members of the same caste, ruling out the potential of blurring caste lines through intermarriage. Now, the third point is social stratification is supported by patterns of belief and ideology. Okay, there is a religious aspect, or there is a conceptual aspect of a faith aspect of social stratification. No system of social stratification is likely to persist over generations unless it is widely viewed as being either fair or inevitable. The caste system, for example, is justified in the terms of opposition to purity and pollution, with the Brahmins designated as a most superior and Dalits as the most inferior by virtue of their birth and occupation. Not everyone, though, thinks of a system of inequality as legitimate. Typically, people with the greatest social privileges express the strongest support for systems of stratification, such as caste and race. Those who have experienced the exploitation and humiliation of being at the bottom of the hierarchy are most likely to challenge it. Okay, then there is another concept of a prejudice. Prejudice refers to the preconceived opinions or attitudes held by members of one group towards another. It is kind of like we are being judgmental to another separate group. Okay, then there are stereotypes are often applied to ethnic and racial groups, and also women. Suppose we can say there are some group, some sect of the society are weaker. We often we portray women as weak, that they are not equal to men. That kind of stereotypes, that kind of judgmental aspects are there in the society. Okay, now, social exclusion is another important topic. Social exclusion refers to ways in which individuals may become cut off from full involvement in the wider society. Okay, it focuses on attention on a broader range of factors that prevent individuals or group from having opportunities open to the majority of the population. Okay, in order to live a fully and active life, individuals must not only be able to feed, clothe, and house themselves, but they should also have access to essential goods and services, such as they should have access to education, health, transportation, insurance. All these kinds of aspects should be there. What if these people are excluded from all these aspects? So, that is social exclusion. Okay, so, here are some examples of social exclusion that existed in the country. Prolonged experience of discriminatory or insulting behavior often produces a reaction, the part of excluded, who then stop trying for inclusion. For example, upper caste Hindu communities have often denied entry to temples for the lower caste, especially Dalits. After decades of such treatment, Dalits they build their own temples or convert to another religion like Buddhism, Christianity, or Islam. Like they're like Chordo, they don't need your acceptance to be in the temple. In the south, we can see Sri Narayana Guru, a person who started his own temple. Okay, for the Dalit community. Okay, or the Edava community. So that kind of movements also was also a part of this social exclusion. Okay. Now next one is caste, tribe and systems justifying the perpetuating inequality. That is a caste system as a discriminating system. Even in the last chapter we have discussed about caste system. Okay. Caste system is a distinct Indian social institution that legitimizes and enforces practices of discrimination against people born in particular castes. These practices of discrimination are humiliating, explosionary, and exploitative. Okay, see, in the early days, based on birth, if a person was born into Kshatriya caste, he had to fight wars. If a person was born into Brahmana class, he was to become priest. So he was a Vaishnava. He was to become a trader. He was a Shudra. He would be likely to do manual labor or scavenger. All this kind of occupation-based separation was there, and it was called caste system was there. Okay. Now we can see, however, in the actual historical practice, economic and social status tended to coincide. Okay, that was thus fairly close correlation between social, that is caste status, and economic status. The higher caste often invariably of high economic caste, while the lower caste were always of the low economic status. In modern times, so we are changing modern times, and particularly since the 19th century, the link between caste and occupation has become much less rigid. So, ritual religious prohibitions on occupational change not easily imposed. You are not supposed to say like you are born to a Kshatriya caste, so you should rule India. That kind of practices are not there. Okay, it is easier than before to change one's occupation. Moreover, compared to 150 years ago, the correlation between caste and economic status is also weaker. Rich and poor people are to be found in every caste. But this is also the key point. The caste class correlation is still remarkably stable at the macro level. As the system has become less rigid, the distinction between caste of broadly similar social and economic status have weakened. Yet, between different socio-economic groupings, the distinctions continue to be maintained. Even though there are, we can say, we can find rich people in both Shudras and Brahmins, or Vaishyas or Kshatriyas, there are separations that are still existing in the society. Okay. Now we come to another aspect, that is untouchability. Okay, untouchability is an extreme or particularly vicious aspect of the caste system that prescribes stringent social sanctions against members of the caste located at the bottom of the purity or pollution scale. So there are the caste system was basically it was based on a purity scale. Like the Brahmins were supposed to be the most pure people, and the Vaishyas and Shudras were supposed to be the most impure people. Okay, and it was often a practice in our country that the touch from these members of the lower caste pollutes members of the higher caste. Okay, so what happened? Terrible punishment for the former. A terrible punishment was given to the lower caste and forcing the latter to perform elaborate purification rituals. The Brahmins, if they got a touch from the lower caste, they had to perform purification rituals. Okay, and there were also another practices like the distance pollution. Okay, if a person comes closer to you about 5 meter or 1 meter, you can say you have become polluted. All these kind of practices existed in our society. Okay, So, in untouchability, also, there are three main dimensions of untouchability, namely exclusion, humiliation, subordination, and exploitation. All equally important in defining the phenomenon. Okay, so low caste are also subjected to subordination and exploitation to some degree. They do not suffer the extreme forms of exclusion reserved for the untouchables. So, untouchables are a different class of people, and the lower caste, we can see, somewhat higher level than them. Okay, Dalits experience the forms of exclusion that are unique and not practiced against other groups. For instance, being prohibited from sharing drinking water, sources of or participating in collective religious worships. Okay, social ceremonies and festivals. There was one movie by Amir Khan in which India wants to form a they need to play cricket match to win a win freedom. Okay, so that is a movie. I forgot the name of that movie. In that we can say there is a untouchable person who's coming. He says he also wants to play, but the rest of the members they won't allow him to play because saying he is an untouchable and he will pollute the entire community. Okay, but that kind of practices, and Amir Khan comes and talks to the people that he's one of us, and we need to include him in the team also because he also has his own benefits. Okay, at that time he was supposed he could throw the ball properly. So every person has his on merit. It is not based on his caste or it's not based on his social status. Every person has his own merit. Okay. There are also humiliating aspects in the untouchability. Okay, like being compelled to play the drums at a religious event. The performance was publicly visible acts of self humiliation. This is a humiliation aspect. And subordination is an important part of the untouchability. Common instances include imposition of gestures such as taking off headgear, carrying footwear in the hand, standing with bowed head, not wearing clean or bright clothes, and so on. Okay, and moreover, untouchability is almost always associated with economic exploitation of various kinds, most commonly through imposition of forced, unpaid, or underpaid labor, or the confiscation of property. Okay, finally, untouchability is a pan Indian phenomenon. Every part of India had this practice. Although the specific forms and intensity vary considerably across regions and social historical contexts. Okay, the so called untouchables have been referred to collectively. So, what were the names that were called for the group of untouchables? That is what we are discussing here. So, Mahatma Gandhi had popularized the term Harijan, literally children of God, in the 1930s to counter the pejorative charge carried by the caste names. Okay. However, the ex untouchable communities and their leaders have coined another term. Okay, that is Dalits. Okay, the term Dalit literally means downtrodden and conveys a sense of an oppressed people, though it was neither coined by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar nor frequently used by him. The term certainly resonates with his philosophy and the movement of empowerment that he led. Okay, there were also another social aspects involved in that also, but just for information, you can know all these things. Okay, and what was the state actions? What did the government do? What did the British do in order to bring the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes to the mainstream level? The schedules listing the caste and tribes recognized as deserving of special treatment because of the massive discrimination practiced against them were drawn up in what in 1935 by the British Indian government. Okay, after independence, there were many policies to bring about special programs for the empowerment of the lower caste people. Okay, one of the main important aspect is the reservations. This involves setting aside some places or seats for the members of the scheduled tribes and scheduled castes in different spheres of the public life. These include reservation of seats in the state and central legislatures, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Okay. Reservation of jobs in government service across all departments in public sector companies. The reservation of seats in education institutions. The proportion of reserves is equal to the percentage share of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. Okay. But for OBCs, this proportion is decided differently. The same principle is extended to other developmental programs of the government. Okay, now we will be discussing about more about OBCs also in the coming pages. Now, what were some of the policies that were brought on by the government. Some laws such as Caste Disabilities Removal Act of 1850, which disallowed the curtailment of rights of citizens due to solely of the change of religion or caste. Most recent saw the law of Constitutional Amendment Act of 2005, which became a law on 23rd January 2006. Coincidentally, both 1980 law and the 2006 amendment related to education. Okay, 1993rd amendment is for the introducing of the reservation of the other backward classes institutions of higher education, while the 1850 act was used to allow Dalits to the government schools. Okay, and there are many other provisions also, you can read through it, and mainly about the Article 17 which abolished untouchability. All these aspects are important. Okay. Now, another important paragraph is that state action cannot ensure social change. State has limitations on doing bringing about change. Okay, state can impose laws, state can punish people, but it is according to the mindset of the people that all these changes are brought about. And there are many pre-independent struggles or movements that were led by Ambedkar was there, Periyar was there, Srinarayana Guru was there. Okay, all these people have contributed for the empowerment of the lower caste or the Dalit community. Now we look into the aspect of OBCs or other backward classes. So there was a question about the difference between OBCs and the other scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Okay, untouchability was the most viable and comprehensive form of social discrimination. However, there were large group of castes that were of lower status and were also subjected to varying levels of discrimination and short untouchability. They were not that kind of discrimination was not there in their these caste, but they also suffered particular kind of somewhat discrimination. Okay, these groups which need not be based on caste alone but generally identified by caste were described as socially and educationally worse classes. This is the constitutional basis for the popular term other backward classes. This is in common use today. Okay, they were actually socially and educationally backward people. Okay, the OBCs are defined negatively by what they are not. They are neither the part of forward caste of the upper end of the status spectrum nor the Dalits of the lower ends. But since caste in the caste system, they are kind of in the middle area, and they also face discrimination. Okay. Now, what were the initiatives that were taken to address the OBCs? Okay, for these reasons, the OBCs are much more diverse groups than the Dalits and Adivasis. Okay, there are about 1900 castes that are in the OBC list. Okay, the first government of independent India under Jawaharlal Nehru appointed a commission to look into measures for the welfare of OBCs. The first backward classes commission, headed by K.K. Kalkar, submitted its report in 1953, but the political climate at that time led to the report being sidelined. Okay, from the mid 50s, the OBCs issue became a regional affair pursued by at the state rather than the central level. Because at state level, OBCs, the demands of the OBCs in regional wise, it is different, and their need is also different. So it was addressed in the state level rather than there was no common aspect for the OBCs. Okay. Southern states had a long history of backward caste political agitation, and that had started in the early 20th century. Because of these powerful social movements, policies to address the problems of OBCs were in place. long before they were discussed in the northern states. Okay, the OBC issue returned to the central level in the 1970s after the emergency when the Janata Party came into power. The second backward caste commission, headed by B.P. Mandal, was appointed at this time. However, it was only in the 1990 when the central government decided to implement the 10-year-old Mandal Commission report that OBC became a major one in national politics. Okay, we can say a kind of like a vote bank politics. Since the 1990s, we have seen the resurgence of lower caste movements in the north in India among both OBC and Dalits. Politicization of the OBCs allows them to convert their large numbers. Recent surveys show that there are about 41% of the national population. Okay, into the political influence. Okay, this is not possible at the national level before, as shown in the sidelining of Telkar report, the neglect of the Mandal Commission report. Okay, there are many problems related to the commission report because it was adopted after 10 years. Okay, that time the population changed. There were other social scenarios that were happened. All these aspects came into being. Okay, Adivasi struggles. Like the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes are social groups recognized by the Indian constitution, especially marked by poverty, powerlessness, and social stigma. The Gana or tribes were believed to be people of the forest whose distinctive habitat in the hill and forest areas shaped their economic, social, and political attributes. So, whenever there is a question about Adivasi struggles, we can always quote sentences from here about the introduction of the Adivasis. They also had tribe based and caste based seclusion, and they were also more related to the Hindu society. Okay. In the case of Adivasis, the movement of populations from one area to another further complicates the picture. Okay, now apart from the northeastern states, okay, no area is there that is exclusively inhabited by the tribal people. There are only tribal concentrations. There are some areas in the states that are dedicated for them or protected for them. All these places are there, excluding the northeastern states. Northeastern states, we can see large proportion, about 90% of the people belonging to the tribal community or Adivasis. In the areas where tribal populations are concentrated, their economic and social conditions are usually much worse than those of non-tribals. The impoverished and exploited circumstances under which Adivasis live can be traced historically to the pattern of accelerated resource extraction started by the colonial government. We have discussed in the previous chapters how the colonial government exploited the forest resources, how they tried to control the government, uh, the tribal people, the Santal revolution, all these kinds of aspects were dealt in the previous videos. Okay, do see those videos before seeing all this because it gives a greater perspective. Okay, from the late 19th century onwards, the colonial government reserved most forest tracts to its own use, severing the rights that Adivasis had long exercised. See, Adivasis saw the forest as their own. Okay, they naturally depended on the forest for their livelihood. Okay, they thought that whenever there is a need of anything, they could ask or they could go around to the forest and collect these things. But all these aspects changed once the Britishers came. Okay, so now we look at the post-independence aspect. Okay, and firstly, the government monopoly over forest continued. If anything, the exploitation of forest accelerated. Secondly, the policy of capital intensive industrialization adopted by the Indian government required mineral resources and power generation capabilities which were concentrated in Adivasi areas. Okay, we can see that more dams were constructed in these areas that were naturally home to the Adivasi communities. Adivasi lands were rapidly acquired for new mining and dam projects. Okay, justified in the name of national development and economic growth. These policies were also a form of internal colonialism, subjugating Adivasis and alienating the resources upon which they depended. Okay, they were already exploited by the British. Now the government also, in the name of economic growth, implemented or started to build mining or mines or dams, all these things. Some examples are projects such as Sardar Sarovar Dam in the river Narmada in western India and the Polavaram Dam in the river Godavari in Andhra Pradesh displaced hundreds and thousands of Adivasis, driving them to greater destitution. Okay, so like the term Dalits, Adivasi connotes political awareness and the assertion of rights. Whenever we listen, whenever the name Adivasi strikes in your ears, for me personally, I think of a person who is deprived of his rights, or a person who is poor, or a person who that kind of picture has been placed in our minds. Why? Because of all these activities. Okay, literally meaning original inhabitants. The term was coined in 1930s as it struggled against the intrusion of the colonial government and outside settlers and money lenders. We have seen the activities of outside settlers, the missionaries, the money lenders, and the colonial government in the previous chapters, previous videos. Do look into it. Okay. Now we look into the struggle of women for equality and rights. Okay. Because of obvious biological and physical differences between men and women, gender inequality is often treated as natural. Okay, however, despite the women empowerment, Adivasi tribals, all these aspects are very important for UPSC. Okay, UPSC love to ask questions from these aspects. So keep a good account of all these things that we are going to discuss. However, despite appearances, scholars have shown that the inequalities between men and women are social rather than natural. Okay, for example, there are no biological reasons that can explain why so few women are found in the positions of public power, nor can nature explain why women generally receive a smaller or no share in family property in most societies? But the strongest argument comes from the societies that were different from the normal or common pattern. If women were biologically unfit to be inheritors of the heads of or and the heads of families, how did matrilineal societies like the Nayars of Kerala, the Khasis of Meghalaya, we discussed in the previous video, Khasis of Meghalaya, they are matrilineal. Okay, how did these societies exist? Okay, there is, in short, nothing biological about the inequalities that mark the relationship between women and men. Gender is thus the form of social inequality and exclusion like caste and class. So, whenever a question is asked, is gender inequality same as caste exclusion, caste and class exclusion? This, what we have discussed now, can be given as an answer. Okay, but with its own specific features. Okay, so how did this women empowerment movement or reform movements started? They are often termed as middle class reform movements because they were these reformers. They were from newly emerging Western educated Indian middle class people. So they started the reform for women empowerment. Okay, they were often once inspired by democratic ideals of the modern West and by a deep pride in their own democratic traditions of the past. Many used both these resources to fight for women rights. Okay, we can see the first campaign that drew national attention was the anti-sati campaign by Raja Ram Mohan Roy. That was in Bengal. Then also the widow remarriage movement in Bengal, in Bombay presidency, where Rana Day was one of the leading reformers from Jyotiba Phule's simultaneous attack on caste and gender oppression. And also we can see reforms taking place in Islam by who? Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Okay. Now, who were these reformers? While Ranade and Rajaram Mohan Roy belonged to one kind of 19th century upper caste and middle class social reformers, Jyotiba Phule came from a socially excluded caste and his attack was directed against both caste and gender discrimination. He found the Satyam Shodak Samaj. Okay, sometimes it can be asked for prelims with its primary emphasis on truth seeking. Fuller's first practical social reform efforts were to aid the two groups considered lost in the traditional Brahmin culture, women and untouchables. Now we look into the Muslim reformers. It was characterized by Sir Syed Ahmad Khan. Okay, but within the aspect, like he wanted girls to be educated, but within the presence of their homes. Like Dayananda Saraswati of the Arya Samaj, he stood for women's education but sought for a curriculum that included instruction in religious principles also, training in arts of housekeeping and handicrafts, and rearing of children. Okay, this may appear very stereotypical today. One has to, however, realize that one's rights, such as education of a woman, was accepted. It started a process of finally made it impossible to confine women to only some kind of education. Because, um, okay, it is often assumed that social reforms of women's rights were entirely fought by male reforms. See, altogether now we are seeing only male reformers, and that ideas of women inequality or equality are alien imports. Okay, still now we have not seen any woman so far. Okay, two books written by women: Stree Purush Tulna, written in 1882, and Sultana's Dream, written in 1905. Okay, now, who wrote these books? Stree Purushatulna, a comparison of men and women, was written by Maharashtrian housewife Tarabhai Shinde as a protest against double standards of male-dominated society. A young Brahmin widow had been sentenced to death in the courts for killing her newborn baby because it was illegitimate. But no effort were made to identify and punish the man who had fathered the baby. Sri Purush Tulna created quite a stir. So whenever when we ask the literary works or how the literature contributed to women reforms, we can always quote the concept of Sri Purush Tulna. Okay, and another important reformer was Begum Rokia Sakhawat Hussain. Okay, and born in a well-to-do Bengali Muslim family, was lucky to have a husband who was very liberal in outlook and encouraged her education first in Urdu and later in Bengali and English. Okay, he was she was already a successful author in Urdu and Bengali and wrote Sultana's Dream to test her abilities in English. So, what was the Sultana's dream about? Okay, in this, Sultana visits a magical country where the gender roles are reversed. Men are confined in the home and observe Purda, while women are busy scientists being with each other in inventing devices that will control the clouds and regulate rain and machines that fly or air cars. Okay, so that were two literary works that contributed to women reforms. So what was the nationalist movement? What was the nationalist? How did the nationalist movement contributed to women's equality? So in the Karachi session in 1931, Indian National Congress issued a declaration in the fundamental rights of citizenship in India, whereby it committed itself to women's equality. Okay, this is a declaration. You can read about it. All citizens are equal before the law, irrespective of religion, caste, creed, or sex. No disability attaches to any citizen by reason of his or her religion, caste, creed, or sex. So, all these aspects were written that there should be no discrimination on the basis of sex was given in all these aspects, and also universal adult franchise were also given. There was no discrimination on the basis of sex in that also. Women shall have the right to vote, to represent, and to right to hold public offices. Okay, now currently what happens? 2 decades after independence, women's issues re-emerged in the 1970s. In the 19th century, reform movements, the emphasis had been on the backward aspects of tradition like sati, child marriage, and the ill treatment of widows. In the 1970s, what happened? The emphasis was on the modern issues: the rape of women in police custody, dowry murders, and the representation of women in popular media, the gendered consequences of unequal development. The law was a major site for reform in the 1980s and after, especially when it was discovered that many laws of concern to women had not been changed since the 19th century. Okay, social change, whether on women's rights or any issue, is never a battle won once and for all. This struggle keeps on happening. Newer aspects of discrimination, newer aspects of exploitation happens. The struggle again starts and it continues. Now another important community or another important group of people that are the disabled community. Okay, the differently abled are not disabled only because they are physically or mentally impaired, but also because society is built in a manner. So this aspect is giving the societal concept, okay, manner that does not cater to their needs. In contrast to the struggles over Dalits, Adivasi, and women's rights, the rights of the disabled have been recognized only very recently. Okay, so some of the common features central to the public perception of disability all over the world are: disability is understood as a biological given. Whenever a disabled person is confronted with problems, it is taken to be granted that the problems originate from her or his impairment. Suppose a person has a problem with his leg. Whenever there is a problem related to him, people assume that it is related to his leg. Okay, so the disabled person is seen as a victim. Disability is supposed to be linked to the disabled individual's self perception. Okay, the idea of disability suggests that they are in need of help. Okay, in India, labels such as disability, handicap, crippled, blind, deaf are used synonymously. Often, these terms are hurled at people as insult. Okay, in a culture that looks up to bodily perfection, all deviations from the perfect body signify abnormality, defect, and distortion. Labels such as bechara, poor thing, accenture the victim status of the disabled person. The roots of such attitudes lie in the cultural conception that views an impaired person as a result of fate. Okay, it was fate that caused him to be impaired. That kind of concept exists. The common perception views disability as a retribution of past karma. Okay, so there are people who say that you are impaired because you are disabled because of your actions in the previous life. Okay, dominant cultural construction in India therefore looks at disability as an essentially characteristic of the individual. The popular images of mythology portray the disabled as an extremely negative aspect. The term disabled challenges each of these assumptions. Terms such as mentally challenged, impaired, and physically impaired can came to replace the more trite negative terms of retarded, crippled, and lame. Okay. So social construction of disability has yet another dimension. There is close relationship between disability and poverty. Malnutrition, stunting is another important aspect in the women. There are a huge percentage of women in our country are stunted because of malnutrition, weakened by frequent childbirth, inadequate immunization programs, accidents in overcrowded homes all contribute to an incidence of disability among poor people that is higher than among people living in easier circumstances. Furthermore, disability creates and exacerbates poverty by increasing isolation and economic strain. There are perceptions, there are thoughts such as a disabled person is not fit for, I mean, white collar jobs, or all these kind of thoughts are there in the society. So which in turn lead to poor economic income for the disabled persons. Okay, so more effort should be taken to encourage the inclusion of disabled people in the society. So by learning this chapter, by reading this chapter, we will be able to look into the aspects of caste, tribe, gender, and disability. All these aspects we look into, and guys, do read this chapter. It is really important, especially the women empowerment part, the disability part. Almost every aspect of this chapter is very important and crucial in the UPC aspect, and also in your life also. So I hope today's chapter was beneficial for you. It was productive for you. So until next time, God bless you all. Jai Hind.